I gave up everything. I mean, I don't know. I doubt I'll ever write another book like this. It was, you know, it was one of those things I just remember when I guess we've all had this, where you're reading a favorite author or band, or you're listening to a band, and then they come out with something, and it's a sequel, or it's just a rehash of everything that you've heard, and you're like, man, they just sold out. But the thing is, it's kind of like someone who's watching a game from stadium seats. What it looks like from that perspective is completely different from what it looks like when you're on the field. So you don't necessarily recognize it. And so I suddenly had this moment where I realized, wow, you know, House of Leaves did okay, and I could buy a house. You know? And I realized I'm going to sell out, because the only way I could really do that, buy that house, would be to write the book in about a year or a year and a half. You know, that's the only way it would make sense. And then I was like, you know what? This is that moment. So I ultimately just said, you know what? Now's the time to do it. So I just went for it. I didn't think it was going to take 6 years. I thought maybe it would take 3 or 4. So I kind of lied to myself a little. And then I plowed into it, and we can even get into the details of that in a second. But you know what? It was 6 days a week, getting up at 5:30 in the morning, working out, meditating, eating a good breakfast, and writing for 10 hours. And relationships, 2 very serious, burned to the ground around me, and a lot of stuff. So I don't really think it's a very healthy way to go about living, but it had to be written. It's a lot like, I think, climbing Everest without oxygen. You know, pay a price. I'm very proud of it. It's my house, I suppose. And so that's kind of the overview on that. I mean, you can get into the detail, the sort of construction of it all. You guys curious about that?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you have 2 narratives going on,
Right.
and do you write them simultaneously? Do you write one out?
Sure. Well, for me, one of the things that's exciting is like David, I really love books. I love their portability, I love their durability. And at the same time, I'm not against technology. I rely on technology. I use all the tools that are available for me, because, you know, I fuck up all the time, so it's like anything that's going to help me is better. So House of Leaves was a way of imagining textually, as well as on a narrative level, what that house was doing. So I could actually emulate the shifts of the house by shifting text, et cetera, et cetera. For me, the thing that I saw very quickly early on was how the book itself could describe this relationship, whereby you have Haley's side here and Sam's side here, and they're as far apart as you can imagine. And then slowly, as you progress through the book, they get closer and closer until in the very middle, they actually touch. And it's at that place that they finally see each other accurately, and they reflect upon each other accurately. But then they begin to move farther and farther apart, away from each other. And that traces how they start to lose their identity in the other person, which happens any time in a relationship. So that immediately, as a concept, was very easy to understand. And it was bound up with these 2 homeless kids that I remembered, that I kept seeing, that perhaps I identified with on a certain level, and in many ways didn't identify with. Another big theme for me was the exterior, the outside, the open. House of Leaves was consumed with ancestors and progeny. It was all about the interior. So for me, there was an energy at last that was saying, I want to go outside of myself, into the open. So there was a lot of work I did in terms of reading. I knew it was going to be about landscape, so I looked at a lot of artists, whether it was Thomas Hart Benton or Andy Goldsworthy. I read Milton, Wordsworth, the Romantics, as well as, of course, you know, a lot of the road literature of the Beats and whatnot, just in terms of how one approached the outside. I read a philosopher named Giorgio Agamben's The Open, which was wrestling with, you know, how we actually can view an exterior. So all of these things were important. And the way they kind of bent in on the book is the word in, for example, never appears. You know, you won't find the word I-N at all. It was all about avoiding interiors. Even though they're working in a restaurant, there's never a mention of ceiling or walls. Those descriptive patterns weren't there. So then what I would do is I wrote it initially all by hand, and I wrote Haley and then I wrote Sam, just in 2 different sheets of paper with pencil. And then I began to kind of storyboard it, always still with pencil, outside of the computer. And then I started to try to figure out how I was going to do this. I mean, how could I really do a book that was accurate to 360 pages, 360 words per page, 36 lines? You know, could I control that? So then I experimented with different software, and I tried Word for a while, and that didn't work. And Quark was a mess. And then finally I settled on the Adobe InDesign Creative Suite. And then I began to set up a series of sort of templates, and then those didn't work as well. But one of the things that was important to me was that I always wanted to make sure that they were kind of teaching each other. So I would start, say, with Sam. I would write 8 pages of Sam, and then I would write 8 pages of Haley. But then I would go ahead with Haley, and then Sam would have to follow. So you'd have to come back to Haley. And I actually ended up getting, a G5 tower, and I got a 23-inch screen so I could lay out both pages, and I could see exactly on this comparative, I could compare the page for page, line for line, and I set it up so I could work that way. And there was a lot of, technical elements of, how to reduce the font continuously so that, because it starts off where we have, Haley's ego and sense of self takes up 2/3 of the page. She has 22 lines here, and then slowly as you move through it, she gets smaller and smaller, until she's exactly 18 lines in the middle, and then eventually by the end we have what I call sort of the broken sonnets of the finale, where she's down to 14 lines here. But there had to be sort of an accurate gradation of all those fonts. I mean, this is all the sort of the technical elements, and then figuring out the fonts. And so I wanted them to have a serif font, and I wanted the historical elements to have a sans serif, and a lot of those choices were made through the course of everything. They didn't happen all at once, But that sort of, that was really sort of minor compared to the amount of work to sort of research the historical elements. So, I mean, it's again with those, sort of building on that desire to push outward to the exterior of the self. One of the things about House of Leaves, the way I see it, is that it's a book that's pretty self-contained. It's a playpen which has all the toys that you're going to need to sort of involve yourself in. This book pushes you way outside. It requires you to move outside of the book, even though it seems self-contained and cyclical. So when you have Sam here talking about, in August 12th of 1865, how he's from the top of the heights, and cataract surge loose, whirls the egalitarian wisps by forests of pale harm. Right? What is forests of pale harm? And why did I spell it with 2 R's? Any guesses? No? 1865? Nathan Bedford Forrest was creating the Ku Klux Klan at that moment. So now you have actually a landscape that is created out of this forest, which you immediately can imagine trees, etc. But at the same time, it's now also a figure, a very specific historical figure that's actually creating a certain type of growth upon the landscape of American culture. Yeah, I know. 200 years. And then there's another one that I like. There's a moment where they're in a party in New Orleans, and Sam's very angry at Haley because he thinks he lost her to the creep. So he decides for retribution that she must participate in an orgy with him. So, of course, you can look at it just on that level, like, okay, he's going to okay, now we're going to get all these girls and we're going to do everything like this. Well, this takes place in 1927. So at one point, he's like imagining all these girls that he's going to be involved with, and he's talking about cases of Dom filling the pool. which of course was the Roaring '20s. You know, there were incidents of these grand parties in New York City where someone would fill up a bathtub with Dom Perignon and hire girls to swim naked there. And then, you know, by the end, Haley ends up sort of you know, collapsing, and he's really concerned for her, and he's taking care of her. And suddenly the party is crashed by polar bears, and bulls are stampeding for the swamp. So what's happening there? Come on, you should know this. No, you can't answer. Huh?
The depression.
That's right, the crash. And there was a famous line about the crash, which was Wall Street sneezed, and the rest of the world caught pneumonia. And so suddenly we have Haley, and she's being carried from this party, which is just, you know, collapsing, sneezing. So that in its sense is like, you know, you get more and you understand more the more you get outside of the book, in a way, which kind of is against the way a lot of books are designed, because in many ways we think that we're going to grab this book and we're going to hold on to only that. But instead it has far more connective tissue perhaps to the world we live in. Like, you know, a Google, you know, window would probably be good in this book, you know, where you could suddenly start to look at, okay, what was happening to the Serbians in Yugoslavia in 1929, et cetera, et cetera. So that's just kind of a pretty big overview on everything.